The Western Front in the spring of 1917 was a place that seemed designed to break men long before the enemy's bullets could. The trenches stretched endlessly, slicing through the French countryside like open wounds in the earth. Rain had fallen for weeks, turning the ground into a sucking morass that clung to boots and refused to let go. The stench of wet earth mixed with smoke, sweat, and the ever-present smell of decay that clung to every soldier's uniform like a second skin. Private Samuel Harker had been on the line for 3 weeks without relief, and each sunrise felt heavier than the last. His unit had been rotated into what the veterans simply called Trench 14, though its official designation was a string of numbers and letters that nobody bothered to remember. The trench was deeper than most, carved into a stretch of earth that never seemed to dry, even on rare days when the sun broke through the haze. Men swore that Trench 14 was cursed long before they ever set foot in it, though no one would say why aloud. That night, when the guns fell silent, the place came alive with whispers. At first Samuel thought it was only the wind, or rats scurrying along the duckboards. But one night, as he sat with his back against the wall of the trench, he heard something that froze him in place. It was a voice, faint, rasping, and far too close. "Help me." The words came from somewhere down the line, where the trench curved out of sight. Samuel gripped his Lee Enfield tighter and called out softly, thinking maybe one of the men had been wounded or fallen asleep on watch. No answer came back. Only the sound of dripping water and the distant rumble of artillery miles away. The next morning, when he asked the other men, no one admitted to being awake at that hour. Corporal Davies, a grizzled Welshman with a face like carved stone, told him to keep his mouth shut about it. "You hear things in this place you best ignore," he said while lighting a cigarette with shaking hands, but Samuel could not ignore it. Each night, the voice returned. Sometimes it sounded like a man crying. Other times it seemed to be whispering words he couldn't quite understand, as though spoken through water. The sound seeped into his bones and kept him awake even when exhaustion begged for sleep. By the fourth night, others had heard it too. Private McKenna swore he saw a shape moving at the far end of the trench, though when he went to check, there were only empty firing steps and churned mud. The whispers grew bolder, coming earlier in the night and lasting longer. Men began to dread the setting sun, knowing that darkness would bring the voices back, and somewhere beneath their boots, deep in the black mud of Trench 14, something was waiting. 2 nights after McKenna swore he saw a figure at the far end, the trench fell into an unnatural silence. No distant gunfire. No shells in the sky. Just the slow drip of water and the wet sucking sound of boots in mud. The men were tense, speaking in hushed voices if at all. Even the rats seemed to have gone quiet. It was during the middle watch, just past midnight, when the first man went missing. Private Henry Lyle had been posted near the communications dugout, a short distance from where the trench dipped into a darker, narrow section that the men called the throat. Lyle was a good soldier, steady even under shelling, but when Corporal Davies came to relieve him, his post was empty. His rifle leaned against the wall, half sunk into the mud, as if he had simply set it down and walked away. At first the others thought he might have slipped out to relieve himself. They searched the nearby latrine pits. Nothing. Then they checked the firing step, the dugouts, even the traverse that led to no man's land. There was no trace of Lyle, not so much as a footprint leading away from his post. When dawn came, Samuel saw Davies speaking quietly with the lieutenant. No one wanted to say the word deserter out loud, but it was written all over their faces. A man vanishing without a sound could mean only 2 things: he had run, or he had been taken. That night, the voices returned, louder than ever. Samuel lay awake in the dark, staring at the low trench wall, and tried to keep his breathing steady. "Henry," the whisper came clear as day, from somewhere just beyond the bend. Samuel sat up, heart hammering. "Who's there?" he called softly. No answer, then, a wet, dragging sound. It reminded him of boots sliding through mud, but slower, deliberate, as though someone were crawling. Private McKenna heard it too. He grabbed Samuel by the arm. "Do you hear that? Someone's out there." The 2 men climbed cautiously onto the firing step and peered down the trench, rifles at the ready. The moon was out, throwing pale light across the sandbags, but the far end of the trench was in shadow. Something moved. Just for an instant, Samuel saw it, a hunched figure, too thin to be a man, standing in the throat. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. A shot rang out. McKenna fired without thinking, the report echoing down the line. The rest of the unit came running, shouting over one another, but by the time they reached the spot there was nothing there. No tracks, no body, only a patch of disturbed mud where something, or someone, had stood. The lieutenant ordered everyone back to their posts, but the damage was done. Sleep became impossible. The men took to standing in pairs, rifles ready, as though expecting another attack, and then, on the third night, the trench claimed another man. Private McKenna disappeared next. It happened just before dawn, when the trench was at its coldest and the mist hung low over the ground. Samuel had been half asleep, his back against the damp wall, when a sudden scuffle jolted him awake. There was a muffled cry, one strangled shout, and then silence. By the time Samuel scrambled down the fire step, McKenna was gone. His bayonet lay in the mud, bent as if something had wrenched it from his hands. The lieutenant ordered flares fired over no man's land, and for a brief moment the trench was bathed in harsh white light. Nothing. No movement. No sign of an enemy raid. The men searched every dugout, every shell hole, every collapsed section of trench. McKenna's tracks led only a few feet before ending abruptly, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. No one spoke for the rest of the morning. When the sun rose, they buried their fear in work. They shored up the trench walls, replaced broken duckboards, and res-tacked sandbags. But the silence pressed down on them like a weight. Even the lieutenant seemed uneasy, his jaw tight as he checked the sentries twice instead of once. That night, the voices came back. Louder. Closer. Samuel lay on his cot, staring into the dark, when he heard them, not just one voice this time, but several. They were speaking all at once, too quiet to make out the words, but he knew one of them. McKenna. He bolted upright and stumbled toward the firing step. The others heard it too. One man crossed himself, muttering under his breath, "McKenna's dead," Corporal Davies said flatly, though his voice trembled. "Whatever that is, it ain't him." The whispering grew until it filled the entire trench, echoing off the walls, coming from every direction at once. It sounded like men calling for help, laughing, crying, all twisted together in a chorus that made Samuel's skin crawl. Then came the vibration. At first he thought it was artillery far away, but there was no distant thunder. The earth itself seemed to hum under their boots, as though something massive was moving deep below. The duckboards rattled. Water sloshed in the trench bottom. Suddenly, one of the men screamed. Samuel spun around just in time to see Private Allen being dragged down, the mud closing around him like a living thing. The others rushed forward, grabbing for his arms, but he sank faster than they could pull. In seconds, he was gone, buried alive in front of their eyes. No one moved for a long moment. Then the lieutenant gave a single order: fall back. Now. They retreated to the command dugout, hearts pounding, rifles clutched tight. The trench was death now. Everyone knew it, but there was nowhere else to go. By the following evening, Trench 14 had become a prison of mud and fear. No one spoke unless they had to. The men took turns standing guard, but most simply sat with their rifles across their knees, eyes wide, waiting for the next thing to happen. Lieutenant Graves called the remaining men into the command dugout. The cramped space reeked of sweat and damp wood, the single lantern casting long, flickering shadows across their faces. "We are holding this trench until command relieves us," Graves said, though his voice carried none of its usual authority. "I will not have talk of abandonment spreading among the men." Corporal Davies shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, with respect, we've lost 3 men in as many nights, without a single shot fired. We can't fight what we can't see." Graves' jaw worked as though he was biting back a reply. Finally, he nodded. "Double the sentries. We keep flares at the ready. No man is to be alone, ever. Whatever is out there, it will find we are not so easily taken." The men filed back out into the trench, but Samuel could see the fear etched into their faces. They all knew that orders or no orders, the trench itself was against them. As darkness fell, the earth seemed to breathe. Samuel could feel it through the soles of his boots, a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched no artillery, no distant barrage. The mud shifted underfoot, sucking at every step as if trying to pull them under. Sentries reported hearing scratching sounds along the trench walls, as though something enormous was clawing its way just beneath the surface. Once, near midnight, a section of the firing step collapsed without warning, sending two men scrambling out of the way just before the ground gave way entirely. When Samuel looked into the newly opened hole, he saw something glisten in the lantern light. It was not water, the surface was too slick, too smooth, like something living. Then it pulsed, once, like a heartbeat that he stumbled back, shouting for the lieutenant. Graves arrived with Davies, and together they stared into the hole. Whatever was down there moved again, slow and deliberate, before sinking back into the mud. "Fill it in," Graves ordered, his voice harsh. "Sandbags, boards, whatever you can find. Fill it before night swallows us all." The men worked in silence, shoring up the collapse, but Samuel could not shake the image. He knew, with a cold certainty, that the thing beneath them was still there. Watching. Waiting. That night, no one slept. Every gust of wind, every drip of water made the men flinch. And just before dawn, the voices came again, this time so loud they seemed to echo inside Samuel's skull. They were no longer whispers. They were calling his name. Samuel could not remember the last time he had truly slept. Every time his eyes closed, he heard them, the voices of the missing men, calling to him from somewhere deep in the trench. It was no longer a faint whisper carried on the wind. Now it was clear, almost conversational, as if they were standing just out of sight. "Samuel," the voice of McKenna said softly, almost kindly. "We're cold down here. Come warm us." He pressed his palms against his ears until they hurt, but it didn't stop. Even over the distant sound of machine gun fire somewhere to the north, the voices slid through, weaving into his thoughts. By midnight, the entire trench seemed alive with sound. Corporal Davies paced like a man on the verge of breaking, muttering under his breath. One of the younger privates had to be restrained when he tried to climb over the parapet, convinced that if he ran into no man's land he would escape the noise. Samuel was posted near the throat again when the mist rolled in, a low, creeping fog that filled the trench until he could barely see 3 feet ahead. The air was wet and cold, clinging to his skin like a shroud. Then came the dragging sound, soft at first, like cloth being pulled across the ground. Then louder, heavier, until it seemed to echo from every direction. Samuel gripped his rifle, heart pounding. Something moved in the fog. A figure, thin, hunched, appeared at the far end of the trench. Its face was obscured, its movements wrong, jerky, as though it were not used to walking upright. "Who goes there?" Samuel shouted, his voice cracking. The figure stopped. Slowly, its head turned toward him. "Samuel." The voice was wet, distorted, but unmistakable. McKenna's voice. Samuel raised his rifle, finger trembling on the trigger. "You're dead," he whispered. The thing began to move toward him, slow and deliberate, its limbs dragging through the mud. Behind it, other shapes appeared, tall, thin shadows, half seen in the fog. They moved in silence, but the voices grew louder until Samuel thought his skull might split. That he stumbled backward, firing blindly. The flash lit up the trench in short, blinding bursts. When the rifle clicked empty, the figures were gone, swallowed by the mist. The other men came running, shouting his name, but Samuel barely heard them. He dropped the empty rifle and clutched at his head. "They were here," he gasped. "They were here." Davies grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him hard. "Pull yourself together, lad. Whatever this is, it wants you afraid. Don't give it what it wants." But as Samuel looked down the trench, he saw movement again, a ripple in the mud, like something enormous was turning over beneath the earth, and he knew, with a cold certainty, that the night was far from over. The fog did not lift with dawn as it usually did. It lingered, clinging to the trench like a living thing, thick enough that Samuel could taste the dampness in the air. The men moved like ghosts, silent and hollow-eyed, each one waiting for the next disappearance. They did not have to wait long. That it began with a scream, high and raw, from the far end of the trench. Private Cole had been on sentry duty near the communications dugout. By the time the others reached his post, all that remained was his helmet, lying upside down in the mud. The ground around it was churned and wet, as though something massive had pushed up from below. The lieutenant barked orders, voice sharp to hide his own fear. "Sandbags here. Get that section blocked off." Men scrambled to obey, stacking whatever they could find across the narrow throat of the trench. But before they could finish, the earth heaved like a living thing, the duckboard splintered. Mud and water erupted upward, showering the men in filth. Something slick and black writhed up from below, too fast to see clearly, and wrapped around Private Given's legs. He screamed and clawed at the dirt, but the thing dragged him down before anyone could fire a shot. "Shoot!" Graves shouted. The trench roared with rifle fire. Muzzle flashes lit the fog in staccato bursts, but every bullet seemed to vanish into the churning earth. The thing did not let go. Given's scream cut off suddenly, leaving only the sound of sucking mud, then silence. The men stood frozen, rifles still smoking, staring at the patch of ground where Givens had been. The mud bubbled once, like something exhaling. "Fall back," Graves ordered. All the way to the command dugout. They retreated in a stumbling rush, dragging ammunition crates and water tins to make a crude barricade behind them. Samuel could feel the ground vibrating under his boots with every step, as if whatever was beneath them was following, tunneling through the earth. When they reached the dugout, Graves slammed the wooden door shut and barred it with a length of timber. The men sat in a tight circle, rifles ready, their breathing loud in the enclosed space. For a moment, there was only silence, then came the scratching, long, slow, deliberate scrapes against the outer wall, circling the dugout like a predator testing its cage. Every man in the room was rigid, sweat running down their faces despite the chill. Corporal Davies whispered a prayer under his breath. "It's not going to stop," he said. "It's playing with us." Samuel gripped his rifle so hard his knuckles turned white. In the stillness, he could hear the voices again, not distant this time, but right outside, whispering his name through the wall, and then, with a splintering crack, the first support beam snapped. The splintering beam gave way with a sharp crack, sending dirt cascading down from the ceiling. The lantern swung wildly, casting jittering shadows across the dugout walls. "Out! Out!" Lieutenant Graves roared, shoving the men toward the narrow exit. Samuel was the last to scramble up the wooden steps, the ceiling collapsing behind him with a deafening rumble. He emerged into the trench choking on dust and cold night air. The fog was still there, thicker than ever, and now it seemed to move in slow, swirling patterns, as if stirred by something unseen. "Form a line," Graves shouted. "We hold here." The men stumbled into position, rifles leveled toward the throat of the trench. The fog parted, just enough for Samuel to see the ground ahead of them ripple, like something massive was moving just below the surface. Then it struck that a black, glistening appendage shot upward, wrapping around one of the younger privates and yanking him off his feet. The men fired in a ragged volley, bullets sparking against the mud, but the thing dragged the screaming soldier toward the throat with unstoppable strength. Grenades. Davies bellowed. .2 men hurled Mills bombs into the churned earth. The explosions shook the trench, throwing mud and splinters into the air. For a moment, there was silence, then an unearthly shriek echoed through the fog, high and piercing, like metal tearing. The appendage recoiled, vanishing into the earth, leaving only a gaping hole where the ground had been. Graves didn't hesitate. "We're not waiting for it to come back. Fall back to the supply trench, now." They ran. Samuel's boots slipped on the wet duckboards as he sprinted, heart hammering. Behind him, he could hear the earth tearing open, the thing pursuing them beneath the surface. When they reached the junction, they hauled crates and sandbags into place, building a makeshift barricade. The fog pressed close, muffling every sound until all Samuel could hear was his own ragged breathing. For a long moment, nothing happened, then the voices started again. "Samuel," it was McKenna's voice, clear as day, coming from just beyond the barricade. "Open the way," the voice pleaded. "It's safe now. We're waiting for you." Samuel's grip tightened on his rifle. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but something deep inside him ached to believe the voice. "They're dead," Davies hissed. You hear me? They're dead. Whatever's talking to you isn't them. The ground on the other side of the barricade bulged upward. Boards cracked. Graves turned to the men, his face pale but resolute. We finish this tonight. Ammunition ready. When it comes through, we throw everything we have. Samuel nodded, though his hands shook. The barricade shuddered, dirt spilling through the cracks. Whatever had haunted Trench 14 for weeks was coming. And this time, it wasn't taking just one man. The barricade exploded inward with a wet, sucking sound, spraying the men with mud and shattered wood. Something massive surged through the opening, not fast, but unstoppable, like the tide coming in. Samuel saw it clearly for the first time that it was no man, no animal he had ever seen. Its body was a slick mass of black flesh, glistening like oil in the lamplight. Long, rope-like tendrils writhed from its bulk, each one tipped with something like a hook or claw. Its face, if it had one, was a pale, featureless oval, stretched and smooth like wax, with no eyes and no mouth. Yet somehow the voices still came, clear as a bell. Samuel, McKenna's voice said, from nowhere and everywhere at once. The men opened fire, the trench erupting in muzzle flashes and deafening noise. Bullets tore into the thing, ripping chunks of flesh free, but it did not stop. The tendrils lashed out, striking like whips, knocking men from their feet. One soldier screamed as he was yanked into the air and dragged toward the creature's bulk, vanishing into its mass with a sickening crunch. Grenades. Graves bellowed again. Samuel yanked the pin from his grenade and hurled it with all his strength. The explosion lit the fog in a blinding flash, tearing one of the creature's limbs clean off. It recoiled with a shriek that made Samuel's teeth ache, thrashing wildly and slamming against the trench walls. Corporal Davies charged forward, bayonet fixed, and drove it deep into the slick flesh. The thing convulsed, flinging him aside like a rag doll, but the attack seemed to slow it. Keep firing. Graves shouted. Don't let it retreat. Samuel reloaded with shaking hands, shoving a fresh clip into his rifle. He fired again and again, the recoil numbing his shoulder. Each shot tore new wounds into the creature's glistening hide, but black ichor poured from the holes and steamed where it touched the mud. Finally, with a great shudder, the thing began to collapse inward, as though deflating. The remaining tendrils thrashed once more, then fell limp. The voices stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of the men's ragged breathing and the hiss of cooling grenade smoke. No one moved. Graves stepped cautiously forward, rifle ready. The mass of flesh twitched once, then dissolved into the mud, leaving behind only a foul-smelling black residue. Within seconds, even that was gone, soaking into the earth as though it had never been there. The trench was silent. Samuel sagged against the wall, chest heaving. He could hardly believe it was over, that they were still alive, but as the fog began to lift, he saw the ground ripple once more, far down the line, near the throat. That it wasn't over, not yet. The fog thinned just enough for Samuel to see it, movement in the distance, beyond the shattered barricade. More than one ripple this time. Several. The ground quivered like a drum skin, and Samuel's stomach turned to ice. There's more than one, he whispered. Lieutenant Graves heard him, but his face remained hard. Then we hold until dawn. Command will relieve us in the morning. If we break now, they'll find nothing left but bones. The men reloaded in silence, their faces pale and hollow. Only 6 of them remained. Davies crouched low, checking the pins on their last 2 grenades. This is it, he muttered. Either we kill it, or it kills us. As they waited, Samuel felt something under his boots, not just the pulsing vibration, but a rhythm, like a heartbeat. He crouched down, pressing his hand to the mud. It was warm. Then he saw it, carved into the trench wall near the throat, half buried under layers of mud, was an old wooden cross. The wood was dark, waterlogged, but the crude carving of a skull was still visible. Samuel brushed away more earth and found faint letters burned into the wood. Abandoned. May 1915. The realization struck him like a hammer. This trench had been taken before, and lost. Whatever they were facing now, other men had faced it too. And they had died here. They tried to bury it, Samuel said aloud. Whoever held this trench before, they knew. They sealed it in. Davies glanced at the cross and swore under his breath. And we dug it out when we rebuilt the wall. The ground trembled violently, cutting off further talk. The men scrambled into firing positions just as the first of the creatures breached the surface. It was smaller than the one they had faced before, but faster, its tendrils whipping through the air like whips. Samuel fired, the shot cracking the stillness, and the others followed suit. Bullets ripped into the thing's body, spraying foul ichor across the trench walls. Another ripple. Another creature emerged, then a third. The trench became chaos, shouts, rifle fire, the deafening blasts of grenades. The creatures writhed and lashed, tearing through sandbags and duckboards as if they were paper. One of the privates was caught by the leg and dragged screaming into the mud before anyone could reach him. The ground swallowed him whole, leaving nothing behind but his helmet fall back to the dugout ruins. Graves shouted, voice hoarse. We make our stand there. The men ran, stumbling over debris, the creatures closing in behind them. Samuel glanced back once and saw the trench itself collapsing as the thing surged forward, filling the space where men had stood moments before. They reached the ruins of the dugout and formed a tight circle, rifles ready. Samuel's breath came fast and shallow. He knew, deep down, that this would be the last fight, and as the first creature lunged at them through the smoke, Samuel pulled the pin on the final grenade. The grenade exploded with a flash that turned night into day, the blast wave hammering Samuel's chest and filling the trench with choking smoke. The first creature disintegrated under the blast, its body bursting apart in a rain of black ichor that hissed where it struck the mud, but there were still more. They surged through the wreckage of the trench, a mass of slick limbs and writhing shapes, their pale faces featureless yet somehow filled with hunger. The survivors fired until their rifles clicked empty, then switched to bayonets, fighting hand-to-hand in the swirling fog. Samuel's world became a blur of noise and motion, Davies shouting, the lieutenant firing his revolver point-blank, the wet sound of bayonets punching through flesh that wasn't quite solid. A tendril wrapped around Samuel's leg, yanking him off balance. He stabbed downward with his bayonet again and again until the thing let go, black ichor splattering across his hands. Fall back. Graves shouted, but there was nowhere left to fall back to. The trench had become a killing ground. Then Graves made a choice that he grabbed the last crate of grenades and shoved it into the center of the circle. When I say, you run, he said, his voice calm despite the chaos. Davies' eyes widened. Sir, that's an order. Graves waited until the next wave of creatures surged forward, then pulled 3 pins at once. Go. Samuel and Davies dragged the 2 remaining privates away, sprinting through the smoke-filled trench. Behind them, the grenades went off in a chain reaction, the blast so powerful it flattened the sandbag walls and sent a shockwave roaring through the earth. When Samuel looked back, the entire section of trench was collapsing, burying the creatures, and Graves, under tons of mud. They didn't stop running until they reached the far end of Trench 14, where the first pale light of dawn was breaking over no man's land. The fog began to lift, and for the first time in days, the sky looked almost clear. The 4 survivors stood in silence, staring back at the shattered trench. Nothing moved. No voices came. Davies sank to his knees, exhausted. God help us, he muttered. We should have abandoned this place when we had the chance. Samuel said nothing. His hands were still shaking, his ears ringing from the blasts. Somewhere deep beneath the earth, he thought he heard a faint rumble, like something turning over in its sleep. When relief troops arrived hours later, they found Trench 14 half-collapsed, its lower sections flooded and filled with debris. No one mentioned what they had seen that night. The official report listed 3 men as killed in action during a night raid, but Samuel knew better. As he was led away from the trench, he glanced back one last time. The morning sun glinted off the mud, and for an instant he thought he saw the earth ripple. Just once, the curse of Trench 14 was not broken. It was only waiting.